Hello. Thank you all for joining us today. We're just going to wait about 30 more seconds as we have a number of folks that are still joining the session. So please just bear with us for a little bit longer and then we'll begin our program. Okay, let's dive in. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be joining us from. My name is Jackson Wood with Descartes Systems Group, and thank you very much for joining us for today's webinar, where my colleague Glenn Palanaki and I are going to cover off all of the latest developments as it pertains to the IEEPA tariff situation. Before we get started, just a quick disclaimer around anything that we're going to talk about here today is the general guidelines. This is not legal advice or regulatory counsel. In addition, it is proprietary to the Descartes Systems Group. So any sharing of this material is controlled under this disclaimer. So with that, let's jump into the meat of our program here today. So we're going to talk about really what's been a flurry of activity over the past number of weeks since the Supreme Court decided at the end of February to invalidate the U.S. administration's IEEPA tariff regime. And as Glenn and I were talking in preparing for the session today, when we originally scheduled this webinar, we didn't have as much information as we do have now. So in many ways, it's good because we have more clarity now than we did even a week ago. But we may be covering some ground that a number of folks in the audience are already familiar with. But again, in the spirit of enabling the community to have a shared sense of understanding about everything that's happening from a regulatory perspective, then I think today's session is going to be incredibly valuable. One other, actually two other pieces of housekeeping here. So the first is we have about 30 minutes worth of material that Glenn and I are going to work through. And then we have saved some time, of course, for any questions from the audience. So the webinar platform we're using does have a Q&A facility. So if you have any questions at any point, please put them into the chat and we will do our best to answer them when we have completed the program. Secondly, when we are finished and before you log off of the webinar, it would be greatly appreciated if you could just take 30 seconds or so to answer a quick survey where we'll ask for your feedback on the quality of the material that we covered, and if there are any questions that you would like to explore with any of us here at Descartes afterwards. So the last thing that I'll say is just to sort of set some broader context. So Glenn and I are both colleagues at Descartes Systems Group, but we work in two different business units here. So I work in the Global Trade Intelligence business unit, and we're primarily focused on serving importers, exporters, the shipping side of the trade equation. Glenn is a part of our logistics service providers business unit, where we work very closely with customs brokers, forwarders, and other logistics service providers. So a lot of my remarks today are going to be grounded in the perspective of the shipper or the importer in particular. And then Glenn will cover off things specifically from the perspective of brokers, forwarders, and other service providers. Okay, so just as a quick level set, we are going to cover what has changed and what we've learned since the Supreme Court decision, a little bit of a forward look around what we collectively as trade professionals should be thinking about in terms of not just securing refunds, but ultimately understanding the broader implications for our organizations. And we'll provide some very specific points of view around what action should be taken now to prepare for the refund motion, but also what are some of the other things that we should be thinking about to build resiliency and responsiveness in our supply chains. So fundamentally, why does the decision made by the Supreme Court matter? Well, let's just set aside the fact that we're talking about potentially billions of dollars in refunds. Obviously, that is a material commercial consideration. But from a more strategic perspective, the IEEPA ruling represents a very significant change, not only in policy writ large, but also in how policy is going to be operationalized going forward. So primarily the reason that the administration leaned on IEEPA to implement tariffs was that it gave the executive branch of the United States government incredible expediency in being able to implement tariffs with quite broad parameters about how those tariffs were configured and ultimately how they were going to be sustained. What the Supreme Court did with their decision is ultimately constrain the executive branch of the United States government by saying, look, there are really fundamental control mechanisms that exist within the United States Congress that are designed to control the imposition of tariffs. And so it doesn't necessarily change the trajectory of tariffs from a United States perspective, but what it does do is create more constraints and more regulatory requirements around how those tariffs are going to be implemented. So it's absolutely essential that we don't get a false sense of security that, okay, well, the Supreme Court has intervened here and we don't have to worry about all of this tariff volatility. It's going to continue. It'll be done under different legal and regulatory auspices. But fundamentally, we're going to have a better degree of visibility and a better degree of at least understanding about how some of these tariffs will be utilized going forward. If we come back to the refund question, though, what's absolutely essential now is that whether you're an importer, whether you're a customs broker or forwarder or other service provider, now is the time to be getting organized and prepared to utilize some of the new CBP infrastructure that we're going to talk about to ultimately facilitate the ultimate delivery of those refunds. So lots of work to be doing now, both very acutely focused on the refund process, but also thinking about how we would continue to navigate what is going to be a volatile tariff regime going forward. So if we just think about this from a big picture perspective and the timeline that we've all been operating under, say, for the past 3 weeks in the so we had at the end of February, the Supreme Court made the announcement that the IEEPA tariffs had been, or that they were illegal. They were beyond the scope of the president. And we had been dealing with those IEEPA tariffs for the better part of a year. There were legal challenges that were initiated through the Court of International Trade that ultimately have now sort of come full circle. But very quickly after the Supreme Court ruling, the Court of International Trade did put a stake in the ground to say these tariffs that have been paid illegally need to be refunded. I think there was a very large degree of skepticism in the trade community that we were going to get any kind of clarity from either the Court of International Trade or from CBP itself around how that refund process was going to work. And if you remember some of the comments from the Supreme Court in their ruling, there were several allusions to the fact that the refund process could be a quote unquote mess. And I think, at least speaking personally, I've been quite pleasantly surprised by the degree of transparency and the degree of speed with which CBP has been reacting to requests on the CIT to the point where we're getting almost weekly updates on progress as it is being made and building out some new infrastructure. But now we're in a position of still questions that companies are asking. And so if we think about, beyond the clarity that we have received from CBP thus far, okay, from an operational perspective, how are we going to get this money back? Are all of our entries that had IEEPA tariffs attached to them going to qualify? Beyond the refund issue, there's also what more replacement tariffs are we going to have to be contemplating as we continue moving forward? And I think we've got some good visibility from the administration in the past couple of weeks around 301 investigations, additional 232 investigations. We also have the tariffs that were announced right after the Supreme Court decision from the president speaking to a much more rigorous and sustainable tariff regime going forward. So again, I want to make sure that we're thinking in two very distinctive ways about, yes, we have the acute issue of getting refunds, but we still have to think about how we're going to navigate and manage tariff complexity going forward. So what do we know about the new infrastructure that CBP has been able to create to facilitate these refunds? So we've got the new CAPE claim portal, and this is going to be a web-based facility that's within ACE that is specifically designed to handle IEEPA refund requests, or what are being called CAPE declarations, to CBP once it's operational. Now, we have heard varying degrees of completion of this technological infrastructure from CBP. They are working very diligently to have it in place within a high-level timeline of approximately 45 days. So I would expect that 45-day period to fall sometime, give or take, in the middle of April. But it is going to be a capability that's accessible both to importers and brokers with ACE portal accounts. Now, if we think about what this is going to look like procedurally, we've got the importer record, or the customs broker that filed the original entry is going to have to upload a CSV file that contains the entry summaries for which the importer is requesting IEEPA refunds. ACE is then going to go through a validation process to make sure that all of the correct information is available, that it's properly formatted, that the submitter is in fact the importer of record for those entries, or the authorized broker that filed the entry summaries on the IOR's behalf, and finally that the CSV file itself is not corrupted. CAPE will then automatically remove any applicable IEEPA HTS numbers from those entry summaries, and then run ACE duty calculations as if the IEEPA duties have never been declared. Entries will then automatically be set to liquidate or reliquidate on a specific number of days from the acceptance date. Now, we don't know what those time periods are going to be exactly yet from a liquidation or reliquidation perspective, but this is the guidance that CBP has provided thus far with respect to the process. Once the entries have reached their scheduled liquidation or reliquidation date, ACE is then going to direct those entries to a CAPE-specific refund process within the ACE Collections Refunds module. Interest is going to be automatically calculated, and then refunds will be provided to the importer of record. Now, one thing that I really want to emphasize, and we're going to talk about it more as we continue through the program, and this has been talked a lot about in the community. The most important thing, two incredibly important things that any importer or broker needs to be thinking about here. One, do you have an ACE account, right? So this is fundamental to even being able to get visibility into the transactions that happen, let alone get a refund. But secondly, and perhaps even more importantly, you need to be enrolled in the ACH payment infrastructure, because that is how refunds are going to be delivered. And I recall seeing a statistic earlier in the week, something like only a handful, like a few thousand US importers are actually signed up on the ACH infrastructure. There's a lot more companies than that that are going to be trying to get refunds here. So if you haven't already got your ACE portal and you haven't already signed up for the ACH process, now is the time to be doing that. So that's how CAPE's going to work at a high level. So let's just talk through what we understand in terms of an order of operations that companies need to be following as you think about the IEEPA refunds. So the importer or their agent, customs broker, needs to identify all of the affected entries. This is information that you will be able to get out of either your internal business systems or from ACE directly. Those declarations will then be submitted through the CAPE infrastructure that will allow ACE and CBP to review the validity of those entries and then ultimately determine the refunds to be delivered and ultimately received by the importer of record through ACH. So that's it at a high level. Given that we still have some degree of uncertainty around specific timelines around CAPE's readiness, the most important stage for anyone on this call right now, and I would hope that most of us have already got a head start on this, is identifying the impacted entries and getting a single view into all of the transactions that are going to be impacted here, because you are going to have to be able to submit those holistically through the CAPE facility in order for your refunds to be actionable. So thinking just now from the perspective of importers, right, before I hand off to Glenn to talk about what customs brokers and other service providers should be thinking about. As I mentioned, you need to be identifying all of your affected entries now. You need to be compiling summaries and duty payment records that are associated with those entries. Like I mentioned, that we will continue to hammer home here. Ensure you've got ACE account access and that you are set up for ACH payments. And then last but certainly not least, as helpful as we hope this webinar is, it's imperative to be monitoring any disclosures or dialogue from CBP, whether that's directly through the interactions with the Court of International Trade or from the agency directly, around where they are from an implementation perspective and when you can expect the new CAPE facility to be available. All right. In terms of now, I've sort of set these two dimensions of, yeah, we want to get IEEPA refunds, but we also have to be thinking about our business resiliency going forward. So obviously tariffs have a huge influence on sourcing and vendor selection decisions. Some of the decisions that may have been made in light of IEEPA, given that we have the new Section 122 tariffs in place that are relatively comparable to IEEPA, some of those decisions may remain more or less unchanged. But I think it's really important to take a fresh look at any pricing assumptions that have been made about tariff rates over the past year. And the last point here, and if we think about a really significant trend that we here at Descartes saw over the past 12 months or so with respect to foreign trade zones as a potential way to mitigate some of this volatility from a tariff perspective, I think we're getting to some good data around those importers that were able to utilize a foreign trade zone have been able to recognize some pretty material advantages in context of these tariff fluctuations by operating the FTZ. Now, there are obviously very specific considerations about how goods are brought into and removed from zones, but I think this is another example of how thinking creatively and thinking with a little bit more of a strategic lens of recognizing that this tariff volatility really is going to remain a structural component of the global trade environment, at least for the next few years. It compels us, both as importers and service providers, to make sure we have the right tools in place to be able to proactively plan and model these ongoing tariff changes. Because as I say, they're highly unlikely to be going anywhere soon. And it's imperative for all of us to be building resiliency and responsiveness into our operations so that we can mitigate the most onerous impacts of them on our businesses going forward.
All right, thanks, Jackson. We're going to pivot a bit of the information now as we reviewed the participants of the webinar. We know that many of you are logistics service providers yourself, so you are servicing the importers that have been affected by the IEEPA rulings and then the removal of them. So we think you hold a really structural importance in not just the operational intricacies of what's happening currently, but also a domain knowledge that you shouldn't be ignoring. So as Jackson gave really good guidance of what you need to be doing today, we want to encourage you that you shouldn't be thinking of this as an importer or shipper or BCO issue, but that you have a critical part in the success for your customers. So clients will need your help as they look at the affecting entries. And that could be whether that's data coming from the TMS or whether that's giving them guidance on some of the portal functionality. We know that you have a really strong relationship with your customers and the ones that you represent. So we encourage you to help them identify those entries as we've been giving guidance here. So a lot of the data that they have, you store in your TMSs. So this historical data might be close to a year old already. And we know because of CBP's requirements for data storage, you are the ones that are critical, really, and that can unlock some of that data, even if it isn't operational to them. So we think you hold a really strong position to be able to assist with the declarations. So as Jackson outlined in the CAPE portal, this is not an importer-only solution. This is also extended to brokers, given if you are a party within the declaration originally. So that then gives you the opportunity to extend a service layer to your customers if they're looking for refund help that the CAPE portal specifically wasn't designed just for them. This is an opportunity for you to be involved in that process. So we see you as a strategic support system to your customers to be able to then help them through a time where some of the information is really tough to collate because it is changing so quickly. So help your customers. That is something that we will continue to say you as logistics service providers are a real key in that entire process. So what do customs brokers need to do now? I think part of our communication as a tech, as a service provider to many LSPs, we want to extend information that we know to you so that then you can distill and extend it to your customers. They're getting a lot of information from a lot of places. So whether that might be from trade organizations, which are very, very valuable. We are part of many of them in the US and Canada and other jurisdictions. Great information coming from them. That might be trade consultants, extending information. We're also seeing a lot of information come from folks like ourselves, tech providers, whether they are just on the tech side or whether they're providing technology and or solutions to importers. So they're also getting pitched opportunities for them to maybe move their business around, even in terms of consulting. So they're getting a lot of information, but you're already an established critical partner for them. So we encourage you to continue to leverage that relationship. You're a trusted provider for them already today. So it's not just to respond in looking at this as a project or a vacuum. Jackson did a great job of reminding us that if it isn't the IEEPA or if it isn't Section 122, what we have seen proved is that tariffs are a lever that the current administration is using. And if experience has showed us in the last year, we shouldn't think of this just in a siloed bubble. There is going to be help that they will likely need, whatever is coming in terms of new legislation and or reactions to that. Be a service provider that they can trust with the wealth of information you already have. So this is a moment really, as we see it, to strengthen the relationship you have with your customers. So we are going to say a couple things again, because we think it's very, very valuable, no matter who's coming in and out of the attendees. We can't stress this enough. Portal accounts, and especially ACH setup, is really, really critical as we look at this situation here today. So that's the mechanism of the refund process. So we ask you that you would continue to stress that to those customers, those shippers, those BCOs that you represent. So some of your customers, some of the importers today might be thinking, okay, I think I'm good. I think I'm ready. And they might not be. So having that quick checklist with them as your customers is either you do any outbound activities to educate them, or they're having inbound inquiries to you as their service provider to give clarity. These are some of the things that we want high on your radar, high on your list to discover with them. ACH is a really important part of this process. So, and we think then you extend that discovery of what kind of help they need, if they need data out of either the portal and or your TMSs, as you have the declarations. And then, of course, for you as service providers, knowing that this is probably not just a single importer problem that you have in your constituents that you serve, really, asking the question, well, how can I scale this? Not just looking at this as a 1 or 2 or 3 importer project, but really across your business. Those are some of the things we want to encourage you to think about. And lastly here, just from a tech side, we're a tech company. So, we recognize, as Jackson and I in the team reviewed the attendees, some of you aren't our customers, and that's great. We thank you for being here. So we don't want to also just address things that are attendees that might be coming from our service, our TMSs. We want to just encourage you that if you aren't using any of our technology, that you evaluate what technology you do have. So we want to be a trusted provider for you. So we think technology really does matter in this, so you can operationalize, as we said in the last slide, really scaling this, because we do think this probably affects a lot of your importers that you're representing today. So we want to be here as an asset to you as we take the information we get, we pour that into our solutions, whether that's CAPE formats, extracted out of TMSs, whatever that might be, or just utilities and functions within the solutions used today that we do support. That is a continually changing environment, but our product team, our R&D team, our customer service team, your reps that you hopefully have a lot of conversations with, we're all at the ready to be able to help. So if you're evaluating that approach, we encourage you to look at your technology provider and evaluate your situation. And we are here to help if you have any other questions. Jackson?
Thanks, Glenn. So just in terms of trying to tie everything that we've talked to here together. So obviously documentation is going to be critical. So anything that you're able to create either from your internal business systems or what you've been able to work with your broker or trade partner with will be important. Going one step beyond, though, just the actual entry summaries or the sort of execution level information, is you may need to be able to provide additional insight into how product classification decisions were made, or any other inputs that could be material to ultimately what informed the entries that you submitted to CBP. Having access to that information, again, with the backdrop of this becoming something that is likely going to be with us, this degree of volatility is likely going to be with us for the foreseeable future. Preparing now for being able to go through these types of motions in the future, I think is going to pay off going forward. One thing that I didn't mention previously, but that I do think is worth noting here, everything that's going to be submitted in the context of IEEPA refunds, I would operate under the assumption that it is going to be heavily scrutinized. And whether or not this is going to lead to follow-up questions or any other type of engagements with CBP, I don't know. I would be speculating there. But I would imagine that this will be an opportunity for CBP to be taking a very close look at these affected entries. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if, in fact, it led to additional questions or additional discovery efforts to really make sure that they're getting to ground on the validity of these entries and the associated refunds. So as always, in anything customs and trade related, documentation is going to be critical, and doing everything that you can to set yourself up to really institutionalize and operationalize this, I think, is going to pay dividends in the future. So what should importers be thinking about? Again, I'm going to just emphasize a few really important points here. So the absolutely table stakes steps is getting all of your entry information collected, being able to confirm entry status. And again, this is all information that's going to be associated with anything that you're able to pull from the ACE portal. This is a changeable environment where we are getting new information from CBP on, like I said earlier, almost a weekly basis. And so being able to, really be able to respond with all of that information in your initial submissions is going to be key. Making sure that you've got that ACH setup done, and continuing to keep an eye on any additional information that will be coming from CBP, whether that's from CBP directly or from their interactions with the CIT. So we do have a slide here. Hopefully it's going to confirm, it will show up well. We grabbed a screenshot from CBP that does include all of the information necessary to be able to do the work necessary to get set up here. Glenn, could you just advance one slide, please?
I did. So this is the screenshot. I do have that up. Yeah.
It's not showing for me in the on the presentation,
okay.
So hopefully
sorry.
it's showing for the audience. No, it's okay. But it has how you can get access to the ACE portal, and then how you can use the ACE portal to get set up on ACH. So QR codes, lots of very specific instructions there. And I'm sure we will be getting questions about this. So this is why we wanted to include this information here, was just to make sure that those of you who haven't done this yet or aren't familiar with the process have some guidance around how it's going to work. So in closing, and before we get to all of your questions, so the key takeaways are, again, the Supreme Court has really sent a strong signal by invalidating the IEEPA tariffs about the executive's branch ability to unilaterally and with a fair degree of autonomy to impose tariffs. That doesn't mean tariffs are going away. It just means that tariffs are going to be imposed in different structural and legislative ways. We know after some speculation that these IEEPA tariffs are subject to refunds, and that CBP is working very diligently to create the digital infrastructure necessary to facilitate those refunds. The work is now in terms of getting ready for that. It's not waiting to see what CAPE is going to look like. It's not going to wait to see what guidance officially comes from CBP. I should clarify that anything that I've referenced in terms of CBP's guidance has actually been through filings with CIT. I'm not aware of any explicit guidance to the trade from CBP directly around how this is going to work. So just caveat there that this is our interpretation of what's been discussed with CIT. Doesn't change the fact that if you want to get into the process for an IEEPA refund, now is the time to be preparing that data and getting ready for submission to CAPE. And last but not least, for those of you who are customs brokers or other service providers on the call, you are going to play a critical role, not only in operationalizing some of the work that's necessary for the refunds, but playing that advisory role of helping your importing clients navigate what is a very significant degree of complexity.
Thanks, Jackson. I'm going to go back to the previous slide just in case it wasn't coming up for others with the QR codes as we go through the Q&A. So I'll put this up before we get to our last slide just so everybody sees it. So Jackson, I have been monitoring the Q&A, so it is quite lively. We probably won't get into everything. So I've queued up a couple here. I think both of us can answer some of those. And we'll try to get through as many as we can here in the time remaining. We want to respect everybody's calendar. I just want to say that it's been an incredible response just in terms of even attendees today. So we are incredibly grateful for you as a community. So one first one I'll take, and then Jackson, I'll give you a second to weigh in as well. So does the importer need to create anything specific in terms of an IEEPA account? And part of that other question was also, what is ACE? So I'll hit ACE and then I'll let you hit the first part of the question. So ACE is the platform that we use on a daily basis, whether you're a self-filing importer or whether you're a customs broker, to communicate declarations, to procure releases, to see your statements. So that is the exchange mechanism, or the platform, as it's called by CBP, that we interact with as trade for declaration. So maybe, Jackson, you can hit, does the importer need to create an IEEPA specific account?
Nope, we haven't heard or seen anything that if you have your ACE account and you're set up for ACH, that there's another hoop that you have to jump through. So that's a somewhat of a qualified no, but I believe it is quite clear, at least in my reading, that ACE account, ACH setup, that's what's going to be required to be able to move through the refund process.
Perfect. Next one, I think it's a great question. It's kind of fundamental. Is this CAPE thing something that is official, or is just still an idea that the trade and or CBP is coming to terms with that they will need? Maybe you can take that one, Jackson.
So again, as I mentioned sort of towards the end of my remarks, so everything that we've talked about here today has been through filings made by CBP to the Court of International Trade. And in those filings, CBP has explicitly named and described CAPE as the digital facility that's going to be utilized for processing the IEEPA refunds. So my interpretation of that is that this is in fact CBP signaling to the Court of International Trade that this is how it is going to be operationalized and the work that is going to happen. As I mentioned, I have not heard any direct guidance from CBP to the trade. It's not to say that perhaps it hasn't happened, but it's not something that I've noticed in my monitoring activities. Like I said, everything that we talked about here today has been through communicate or through filings with CIT. So my interpretation of that is that CAPE is real. It is happening. It is being built. And I'm sure we will hear more, even perhaps this week, on the progress that CBP is making in building that tool.
Perfect, Jackson. So a quick little follow-up, a part B, as it were, to that, and I'll take this one. Is CAPE available today? And I think we've said it, but let's just be ultra clear. As we stand here on as we're live today, CAPE is not operational yet. We've been given guidance that it is something that they are actively working on. So that's why we wanted to get the information out, even though it isn't something that you can do today, but that's why we had our key takeaways of there's a hefty amount of data heavy lifting that you can do today, even though the portal isn't available. But the guidance was within, I think, Jackson, you mentioned 45 days. So we are in that window with the information that we know today. Another question that came up was, well, if I'm an importer and I have multiple brokers, what would a process like that work? So maybe, Jackson, I'll hit the broker side, and then you can give the importer perspective. This is where we believe, and we know this exists, this is quite common. So that's why we encouraged the brokers or the LSPs in the room, even though you know your customer might be filing through a few different service providers, this is an opportunity still for you to represent yourselves and, of course, guide them through the process, because that is quite common that an importer would have multiple. So we know that you'll be able to, the filings that you have done to assist them. But of course, they as an importer themselves, Jackson will allude to, they have their own purview of what they'll be able to do in CAPE.
So it's all really going to come down to what system of record or systems of record are you going to be leveraging for this? Whether you're working with one broker or multiple brokers, it's still ultimately a core responsibility of the importer of record to be maintaining audit-ready information in some type of way, shape, or form. So I think it's going to be a matter of, if you're working with multiple brokers and that's across perhaps multiple business units, all right, put together a strike team to figure out, okay, if we've got one business unit that's using a system like SAP GTS and another business unit that doesn't have any trade technology in place, so that everything's on spreadsheet or it's in the finance system, very diligently trying to map out where all of this information resides, being able to consolidate that information. Again, whether or not it's been processed through multiple brokers at that point is less important than, do we feel we have a single source of truth with respect to all of the imports that we're going to try to navigate through the refund process with. And again, this speaks to the importance of having, again, doesn't have to be a Descartes system. It can be, any type of technology, but it speaks to the importance of robust tooling internally that helps you maintain not only visibility, but control over all of the information as it pertains to your global trade activities.
Fantastic. Jackson, again, reading through the many questions. So have we gotten any signaling around that there will be an alternate process, meaning refunds via non-CAPE?
No, and I think this is a really important thing because I don't know what the right answer to, because you've heard, again, in the trade, lots of people talking about, should we be filing a protest? Should we be doing a post-summary correction? Like, I don't think that there's any good answers to those questions. I think that there are some companies that are saying, we're just going to throw everything at it and let customs tell us what we do or don't have to do. There's lots of debate. Well, do we need to start a litigation motion, right? Like, do we need to be suing the government to try to make sure that we're protecting the integrity of our refund rights? And I don't think that there's any explicit answers to those questions. The point of view that I would share is that we have to follow the guidance that is out there. And again, whether it's guidance officially from CBP or what CBP is telling to the Court of International Trade, that, to my eye, are the facts that we are dealing with. I've heard lots of comments about some companies submitting post-summary corrections and having them rejected, submitting protests and having them rejected. So I don't know what the right answer is in terms of everything that a company might want to be doing is, but I do know that we have got some clarity around how things are going to work, and it's CAPE. And so if it were me, that's what I would be working towards. Thank you.
So we're on our final descent. We're going to answer maybe one or two more questions, and then we want to just say our thank you. So I'm going to hit one here quick, Jackson, then I'll ask you another one. So there was a question that came asking about, well, what if I don't know or what if I filed something and then at the importer, complex organization, they file something and it ends up being the same entry number. We're given to understand that part of CAPE, in that validation process, there will be checks and balances that CBP will be doing. So I think we can walk forward reasonably assuming that, it will be one refund per declaration. Even though we don't understand all the nuances yet, we should reasonably assume that will be part of some of those validations and checks that CBP has already signaled that will be part of the CAPE process. Another one, maybe quick, Jackson, is have we seen the layout of what this data needs to look like? Do we have any guidance on that yet?
No. Other than, it's interesting to me that they've explicitly stated it needs to be in the CSV file format, but in terms of the specific data elements, I think that's likely still to be determined. Now, I would strongly encourage everyone. So all of the documents that CBP has submitted to CIT are publicly available, and some of them are quite detailed, far more detailed than we went into here. So I would highly recommend getting your hands on those documents. You could find them at the Court of International Trade's website. But I don't think that it has been expressly articulated all of the different data elements that are going to be required to be included in those CSV files. So I think we'll still have to wait to understand exactly what that's going to look like from a practical data element perspective.
Excellent. Thank you, Jackson. So there are many more questions. So we want to just say thank you for the lively Q&A. We want to respect everybody's time. So I'm going to hand it back to Jackson in 10 seconds, but we will try to collate the questions and provide some context. And some people did ask, will this be available online after in various formats? So Jackson, I'm going to hand it back to you to close us out, to answer some of those questions and just to say the final thank yous.
Yeah. So thanks, Glenn, for facilitating that. And again, just to echo Glenn's comments, thank you all so much for the engagement and joining us today. Look, I think, as I mentioned at the outset, I feel we actually have more information now than I expected us to have. So really kudos to all of the folks who are working so hard within CBP and partner organizations to drive progress on this front. This really is if not completely unprecedented, not something we haven't seen in quite some time, around the amount of work that has to be done in a very short time to facilitate, the exchanging of billions of dollars. So just incredibly hard work and dedicated work happening from all the folks on this call, but of course, all the people who are working behind the scenes. Just a quick reminder that before you leave us today, we'd love to have your feedback on whether this session was helpful. I would imagine we will be talking again with the community in the weeks ahead as we get more clarity. If you think it would be valuable for us to do another session on this as we get more information, please let us know in the survey, and we will take that into consideration as we think about how best to support our customers, our potential customers, in what is a very complex, changing environment. So thank you all again very much. Glenn, thank you. It was a pleasure. And stay strong, everybody. I know these are challenging times for everyone in the customs and trade business, but we were made for this.
Yeah.
Thank you all again.
Thanks, Jackson. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.